Welcome to the Pele Nels Taylor and Martin Seif Show, Capitals Uncovered, where we cover geopolitics on both sides of the Atlantic. And our side of the Atlantic, of course, includes Africa and this growing continent we don't cover nearly enough. And the most important country in Africa is, of course, Nigeria, whose population is very large. And we had Mike Arnold on a couple of weeks ago, and it's one of the most enlightening and important shows we've ever had because it highlights a country about which we ought to know much more. And you told us about the architecture of the political forces at play and all the sensitive spots in that country where the pressure points are. I mean, you've got an enormous network, haven't you, Mike? You've written books about it, travel a lot in the country. And what you're going to tell us about today is something that we ought to know, which is, well, I'll say this, I know it's an unashamed sort of clickbait phrase, the Nelson Mandela of Nigeria. Of course, the original Nelson Mandela was held in jail for 35 years off the coast of Cape Town, and then he marched triumphantly into the presidency of South Africa and has become a sort of symbol for everything good about the world, a sort of like Václav Havel or Martin Luther King, you know, a man who stood up for his beliefs and made the world a better place, supposedly. But I think that this Nigerian would-be Mandela is actually, it could be potentially change Africa in a completely different way, I mean, morally and politically, because Nigeria is Africa's most important country. Mike, tell us about that story and why it's sort of relevant now. And I mean, you could tell the whole story arc from this man's beginnings in the UK and then his arrest in Kenya and the current state of his incarceration and so on. Over to you, Mike.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's good to be here with you guys. And yeah, this story is an interesting entry point because you scratch at it and it brings the full picture into focus. The man we're talking about is named Nnamdi Kanu. Nnamdi Kanu is a man of Igbo descent. If you remember, there's four primary tribes in Nigeria. There's the Igbo in the southeast, Yoruba in the southwest, and then the Hausa in the middle belt and north. And then there's the invaders, the Fulani, who are not indigenous to there. They invaded, most specifically in 1804 is when the big jihad started. They co-opted the Hausa, and they rule the land. They're the Caliphate that Great Britain partnered with to, through indirect rule to control what's going on there. And the Igbo, southeast, are the ones that the British embraced, and they embraced the British. When the British showed up and said, this is ours, the Igbo are incredibly bright people. They embraced Christianity. They embraced the English language. They went to school in England. A lot of them speak with British accents and drink tea with their pinky sticking out, the whole thing. And the British used them to run the whole machinery of colonialism. Now, in 1950s, they discovered oil in the southeast under the feet of these Igbo. At the time, they believed it might be the largest oil reserve on Earth. It certainly is proven to be one of the largest. The problem is the Igbo are incredibly industrious people. If you look wherever they settle around the world, they rise to the very top, most educated, exactly, wealthiest in a lot of places. And it's through hard work and industry and being good citizens. They're not the kind of immigrants that come in to take, they come in to build. And exactly. The British didn't want to deal with them because they're unruly, very, very autonomous, but also because and I'm singling out the British because that's the reality here, but the colonizers in general don't want to export finished product. They want to export raw materials. And so when they gave Nigeria its independence in 1960, they nationalized the oil that's in the southwest, and then they assured control would stay in the hands of the Caliphate North, the Fulani Caliphate North. And so they cut the Igbo out of their inheritance, but they still ran the machinery. And so there was a coup and then a counter coup. And in 1966, 1967, the Fulani federal government started a pogrom, massacred 40,000 Igbo across the north and middle belt, and they retreated back to Igbo land. At the area they called Biafra, 1967. Now, this was jihad. Same tactics you see today. The beheadings, the rape, the slavery, the hacking off limbs, and all that. Same thing today. Same thing that you saw in 1804 and all the way through. Same tactics. The Igbo had a leader, Ojukwu, who actually met with the federal leader, Gawain, who I know personally. And they came to an accord, the Aburi Accord, that we're going to have federalism, we're going to have autonomy, regional autonomy, and we're going to live together. When they got back from that accord, Gawain said, "Oh, that was a mistake," tore it up, and it forced the Southeast to declare independence. The world calls it a civil war. They refuse to accept that because they say we were never a nation. We were never a nation. We never consented to this. We were stuck together under this caliphate. So that's what promulgated the Biafran War. We can get more into that. I'll fast forward because we're getting to Nnamdi Kanu. As many as 3 up to 5 million were starved to death intentionally through blockades and that were supported by the British, enabled by the British. In 30 months, the most horrific scenario. They finally had to relent, and that's where you get modern Nigeria. The same people that led that are still in charge of Nigeria, the same regime. You fly into Lagos, you land at the Murtala Mohammed Airport. Murtala Mohammed is notorious in the Biafran War for massacres. He would round up people and just mow them down, and they named the airport after him. One of the Minister of Finance during the war on the federal side, who very clearly stated that the policy is starvation. He's the face on the 100 Naira bill. So, I mean, it's the same regime that rules today. And it's been, since 1970 that this has been, so it's 56 years now. So about a decade ago or so, a gentleman named Nnamdi Kanu, British citizen, dual citizen, British-Nigerian citizen, from London, formed an organization, the Indigenous Peoples of Biafra, IPOB, and it's grown to be a nationwide organization. The Nigerian government went into a court without any argument, without any hearing, just went in and walked out with a declaration that IPOB is a terrorist group. And no other government on earth has recognized that. It's just the British government that calls this a terrorist group. Nnamdi Kanu broadcast from London, Radio Biafra. He picked up on the radio channel that they had during the war, to motivate his people, Radio Biafra, and said a lot of the things that I've ended up saying. I didn't come to it through his writings. I came to it through my own research, but it ends up, the truth is the truth, and we both landed on it. And for speaking truth in London, in 2021, he was visiting Kenya and disappeared, showed up in Abuja, the capital of Nigeria. They do not have an extradition treaty. It was completely illegal. The Nigerian government abducted him in Kenya illegally, tortured him, and then illegally rendered him back to Nigeria. He languished in the Nigerian Abuja jail until last year. They put him on trial under a law that had been repealed with no continuation clause, a non-existent law. And they sentenced him first. They said he's supposed to be sentenced to death, but the judge had mercy on him and sentenced him to life and transferred him 800 kilometers away from his attorneys, from his family and everything, to Sokoto prison, the Caliphate's personal little collection. And he's sitting there now serving a life sentence. The Nigerian government is trying to get that judgment changed to a death sentence. Wow. For words spoken in London by a British citizen who was illegally rendered from Kenya, and Great Britain has said nothing about it. That's where Nnamdi Kanu sits. Wow. I say he has potential to be the Nelson Mandela of this generation. His people revere him as a prophet. What's interesting is he's a Jewish man. The Igbo trace their heritage back to ancient Israel. They've been practicing eighth-day circumcision since before recorded history. So they have a strong claim there. He's a practicing Jew, currently serving a life sentence in the Sultan's private dungeon.
Wow.
It's a pretty horrific situation.
And I guess one in a million people have ever heard of him in the West,
Exactly.
1 in 1,000 or something, and he hasn't been on any BBC. The New Statesman hasn't written a reportage. Atlantic Magazine hasn't got any features articles about it. Why in the West? I'll leave it over to you, Martin, in a second. But why in the West have we paid so little attention?
For one, Great Britain's probably their single biggest, I would venture to say, fear, as far as foreign policy is concerned, is the revelation of their complicity in the ongoing Nigerian genocide. Their complicity in Biafra. The word is verboten. When I burst into the scene in October after the press conference in Abuja that blew up this whole current situation, when I was called to go to Washington, the person who was guiding me along pulled me aside and said, "Hey, just don't say the word Biafra. They'll close the door on you," because that's what we would call deep state. That's the policy. You don't talk about it. The British will not let it be talked about because they have the blood of millions of children on their hands, and it's ongoing to today. They're still sucking the oil out of the land.
So when you just say ongoing genocide, I mean, in what sense is it ongoing? I mean, how many people are dying per month or per year?
I never trust the numbers of the government and the institutionalized stuff, especially their group called Intersociety that has been quoted by our United States State Department, quoted by Donald Trump. They say some 185,000 people since 2009 have been killed in this ongoing jihad. About 2/3 of them Christian, about 1/3 of them non-jihad Muslims.
Wow. Martin, what were your thoughts about this?
100% appreciation and full agreement with you, Mike. God bless you for saying it. As I said when we had you on before, and hopefully we will have you on repeatedly again, I was at least an observer across not even across the Irish Sea, but in Britain in the early days of this, because I marched for Biafra in protest marches in Oxford, and then used my impecunious student loan to take train tickets up to London to march in Trafalgar Square and to march in protest against the Labour Harold Wilson government's genocidal policy. And I actually, I got myself, I belatedly discovered only decades later, onto British security lists because I joined the Labour Party at Oxford simply in order to attend a meeting so I could not threaten, but very civilly ask Foreign Secretary Michael Stewart, a man now who should have been hanged as a war criminal, much more so than Ribbentrop, because Ribbentrop was not actively involved in the Holocaust or the monstrous things the Germans did in the East. And Michael Stewart knew everything that was going on in Africa. And he was one of these disgustingly sweet, innocent, pure, virginal, high-minded, nonconformist, high-thinking, idealistic, gentle, polite English gentleman who unleashes the most horrific Holocaust on the world. And I said, how can you let 1 million children starve to death? They already starved to death. And there was a murmuring in his minders around him, because these are questions then that were as verboten as they are now. And he amazed me with his answer, Mike. This is back in 1969 at the at Oxford University, the Labour Party meeting. He said, "Oh, I cannot sleep at nights over this, but we have no choice." They always say we have no choice because we are defending the sacred borders of Africa. And if we don't do this, there will be civil war, as if what was happening at the time, the most terrible civil war in modern African history, he himself was inflicting and supporting to the hilt for the oil interest, though I think he was probably personally too stupid to realize who and what he was doing it for. But they were doing it. Oh no, because then everything will fall apart in the sacred borders, which they had invented, as you point out, no backward yourself. They had invented them. There was no such thing as Nigeria. It was invented in the 20th century by British colonial administrators, as you pointed out to us and documented to us the last time you were on. If we can squeeze it in, you might want to refer some points to this. But I don't think he even knew this. They were totally ignorant of it. So to hear you say, first of all, there is horror to me that 55 to 60 years after these monstrous crimes on a literally Nazi scale of genocide and extermination were carried out. I mean, we say the same double standard in the West today. There is, at least in Europe, rightly so, disgust at the massacre of ongoing massacre of Palestinians in Gaza, although there's no mention of the horrific crimes that Hamas triggered it all with their attack on Israel in 2023. But while there is rightfully outraged for the plight of the Palestinians, there is none correctly for the plight of the Ukrainian people at the hands of their own government, who have been fed again on a genocidal scale by their own government to be slaughtered by the Russians. And now we see the same, you're documenting the same thing here, but I have two follow-up questions. First of all, is there any feasible possibility, since the British, of course, will never say a word against themselves on this with their usual monumental hypocrisy, can this be brought by anyone to the International Court of Justice at The Hague? And I lament, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. And there's, again, the organization that Nnamdi Kanu built, IPOB, has grown, and he started a global movement. I'm impressed with their level of organization. And they have very high-level people all over the world that push this stuff. The problem is, I keep telling them this, and I've been pulled into the higher levels. I, in fact, released a document recently, co-authored with Nnamdi Kanu. Just a disclaimer, I've actually worked with the fella. But no court, no government, no politician is going to expend their credibility, their capital, to buck the whole system if there's not a global outcry. If it's a word, if nobody's ever heard the word Biafra, if nobody's ever heard the name Nnamdi Kanu, I just don't see it being a feasible reality. I think what needs to happen is the awareness needs to be raised first, and I'm working on that. I just wrote a novel about one of the stories. But it can be, but what are they going to do? I mean, even if they rule on it and declare it, Britain just going to slap it down. I mean, it's not going to, nothing can be binding unless the world steps in, other governments step in and speak up. And again, they're not going to do that until there's global awareness, and there's none.
What about the BRICS nations? The Chinese, I mean, let's leave aside if they're good guys or bad guys, but they're the only force powerful enough to bring this onto the agenda, perhaps with the Russians.
Well, see, the Chinese are currently looting the hell out of Nigerian minerals. It partnered with the Caliphate. The real enemy here, the real problem is the Sokoto Caliphate, founded in 1804 by a Fulani invader, Usman Dan Fodio. His grave is considered a mini Mecca today. He's revered. His teachings are revered. He's a prolific writer. Two primary teachings of his. One, he established the Caliphate to be the launch pad for the Mahdi. And he was Sunni, so he's not the one where there's a guy hiding in a cave for 800 years. There's a future Mahdi coming, and my reading of the whole situation, it's the only caliphate on earth that fits the criteria for the Sunni Mahdi, and we're in that prophetic time zone. So he taught that is believed, that is taught, that is revered today. And he also taught that any Muslim who doesn't join their jihad is to be killed. And you're seeing that played out today as well. They have the chokehold on it. That's who the British partnered with and continue to partner with. And that's who the Chinese are behind the scenes working with and looting up to $9 billion a year in minerals. The Russians provided MiGs to the Federals in the Biafran War. They were all on that side of it. You had British pilots, mercenary pilots, flying MiGs at the height of the Cold War.
That is correct.
That's baffling.
Wow. A follow-up again, Mike, and that is, where is France in this? Because they and the Vatican were the two unsung heroes who tried to save innocent lives in the 1960s, in the 67 to 70 war. Is there any interest, activity, effort from either Paris or Rome?
I don't want to get into, I have a lot of Catholic friends. I'm not Catholic, But the fact is, the papacy, the last couple iterations of it have been at least, to be polite, spineless. The Pope recently came out after meeting with David Axelrod behind closed doors, when that's a whole nother story, came out and said, oh, there's no genocide happening, and just sort of tried to sweep the whole thing under the rug. Now, a lot of the Catholic leaders, I'm friends with Cardinal John Oniyakan over there in Nigeria. He's a he retired now, but papal elector. They're standing up saying, wait a second. And so you're starting to see some movement. But right as it sits now, there's I don't have much hope there. Now, here's something interesting that you pointed out. The Biafran War, the Catholic Church did heroic work. The largest airlift in history, save the Berlin airlift, which was done by two superpowers. This was a privately done airlift. Spearheaded by the Catholic Church, but it was also the first ecumenical relief effort in history. It was Catholics and Protestants working together, hundreds of tons, flown in. In fact, it was Frederick Forsyth's idea after the Federals bombed the airstrips. He gave Ojukwu the idea. They converted a stretch of road northwest of Owerri into an airstrip. But the problem is they could only land at night, because they were the British backed Federals shot down a Red Cross aid plane, white with the Red Cross, shot it down in broad daylight to stop this airlift. But the pilots would radio in on final approach to a completely dark landscape, and the people would run out of the bush with lanterns and light up the airstrip for 30-second count. They would land and they'd turn the lanterns off. And they did as many as 50 flights a night like that, brought in hundreds of tons, kept millions of people alive. Wasn't enough, but heroic work. Interestingly, and this is what triggered me to write my novel, I found out one of the many pilots were killed, planes destroyed. There was a pilot named Augie Martin. He was a Tuskegee Airman, which was an elite black squadron in World War II.
Yes, they were legendary.
He was a Tuskegee Airman, went on to be the first black pilot for an American scheduled airline. His wife, who was with them for humanitarian purposes, was an off-Broadway star and starred in a soap opera. And they were killed in a plane crash during the airlift. People on the ground said they were shot down by a MiG. The official report, it was a storm. But they died in this airlift, and you've never heard their names. Why is there not a movie about these people?
Yeah.
It's an amazing story.
Well, I tell you what's interesting, Mike and Martin, is that, I mean, Nigeria is a country, was it 200 million? I mean, and even back in the 60s, it was the largest country in Africa. Relatively little is known about that country compared to its size. I mean, let's say I've studied and written about, the Congo and northern Rhodesia and Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has taken up a huge amount of bandwidth for its population size, but Nigeria itself seems to be a black hole. We pass it over. We think we know it's a large country, but in fact, obviously, and it's not surprising that it's just got just as much recent history as any other country of that size. It's just that there seems to be a blackout. The Reuters and the New York Times and the BBC haven't reported on it, and both Marty and I know the power of these powerful international Anglo media institutions to completely black things out,
Exactly.
And it reminds me also that those Caroline Elkins books about Kenya and the Mau Mau Rebellion, which hardly anyone knows enough about, that was a kind of genocide. And that was pointed out to me by the Afrikaner head of intelligence in the 1980s. I mean, recently when he's retired, he said, all this talk about apartheid, yeah, sure, we were doing bad things. But I mean, that's because the British were highlighting what we were doing so they wouldn't have to talk about Kenya. And now what you're saying is Nigeria is the other side of the African continent is just as bad. It makes perfect sense. It's like a piece of the jigsaw that you've given us. You've given us one of the biggest pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. Very, very interesting. Martin.
Yeah, it's complete blackout, and it's intentional. All the superpowers were on the wrong side. The wrong side won. And the genocide has been erased. They continue to marginalize and suppress the Igbo people. They took all of their wealth after the war and gave them each family 20 pounds to start over. And with that, they've rebuilt remarkably. And again, wherever they've settled around the world, they rise to the very top. Amazing, honorable people. Why can't they rise to the top back home? It's because they have oil. And for them to rise would mean Britain can't get its oil cheap. is what it comes down to. They wouldn't be able to export the raw materials. But yeah, it's absolutely suppressed. It is a black hole.
Right.
Fully agree. If I may also, something else, everything you said resonated with me, like strikingly so. And another aspect was the reason the British administrators resented and were jealous of and even fearful of and were vicious towards the great Igbo people, precisely because they played by the rules, precisely because they were hardworking, precisely because they succeeded when they deserved to succeed, precisely because they were honest and honorable. This is exactly how the British treated the Hindu intellectual population of Bengal for hundreds of years. By the time Britain left, and even then, they suppressed Bengal and put Muslim Bengalis too at the mercy of Muslim Pakistanis. And the British encouraged the effective, the literal genocide of the Bengali people by their fellow Muslims until they were actually liberated, as you know, in the 1970 war between India and Pakistan. The Indians won that war decisively, not against the very tough effective Pakistani army and what remains of core Pakistan today, a very formidable, serious, impressive state, but hundreds of miles away, 1,000 miles away across the subcontinent, the Bengali people who were Muslim rose up in support of the Hindu Indian army to liberate them from their fellow Muslims, because their fellow Muslims, again, were doing British genocidal, dirty work for them. And you even see the same pattern. The British brought the Jewish population into Palestine because they were looking forward to having poor, defensive, stereotypical Jews that they had been or assumed to have been for thousands of years, who would be dependent on the British and give the British an excuse to rule the Arabs and have a secure military base against the Arabs. Instead, it turned upside down. The Jews, like the Igbos and like the Bengalis, became too hard working for British comfort. So the British ended up turning on them eventually.
That's right. If you look around the world at the British economy today, it's investment funds and its sources of income from around the world. It's so much of it, the majority of it comes from these partnerships with these brutal Islamic regimes.
Yes, exactly.
From historically. And now that those regimes are connected through the OIC, that's why they can't speak out against what's happening in London, because if they offend the Muslims, they shut off the tap, and the whole British economy craters because it's all built on these brutal regimes around the world.
Well, what do you mean? You mean that the rape gang story in the UK, for instance?
Yeah. The British government can't come out strong against Islam, right? Because if they do, their economy is gone.
So is that rather waspish comment by Netanyahu last week saying that Britain will be the first Islamist country with nuclear weapons or something?
The chickens are coming home to roost.
I don't believe that, but even so, yeah.
The chickens are coming home to roost. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
Right. Well, this podcast, I think, will give people a complete reorientation on their map of the world, and their map of Africa and their understanding in 40 short minutes. But guys, we've got to wind up there, and I'll just tell a little personal story. I'm visiting my mother in the south of Sweden, and she was sharing a flat with a couple of Swedish girls in 1960s London, Hampstead, and guess who was a frequent visitor? Freddie Forsyth, So I'll pass that story on, He was then a Reuters correspondent. I don't think I think he was fired by Reuters and was kind of looking for his first break. And,
that is correct.
So he's passing his draft around, or he was a freelancer. He was going to Biafra or something. Anyway, Martin, sorry.
He resigned from the BBC during the Biafran War because they had the skewed coverage. They were doing puff pieces on it all, and he couldn't stomach it, so he quit. Yeah.
So he's a hero in your eyes. Good.
Absolutely, at least in that regards. Yeah.
Mike and Marty, I'm afraid we just got a minute left. Thank you so much, Mike. You've got to come on again soon.
Yes, please.
Absolutely fantastic little exposition there of Africa's most important country and one of the world's most important conflicts, really, and the British power behind the scenes in much of the world's doings. Thank you so much, gentlemen, and see you tomorrow. Thanks, Mike.